Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Shred's Takes. I'm your host, Mike Shredder, joined by Max McKersie, who is a former Bates soccer player. So, thing that's great about the NESCAC is you always build good connections afterwards. Great conference in that regard. He also went to NYU where he played soccer there, and he's currently still there studying sports business from, I would say, a global perspective. I think is a good way to characterize it. But as always, it's always good talking to Max. He and I are part of the NESCAC Sports Business group on LinkedIn. That's how I first met him. So, Max, thanks for joining the pod today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Excited to get to it.
Absolutely. So, like I ask all my guests, right, who are athletes, there's obviously the passion for sports. And,
Mhm.
for you, obviously, you kind of grew up playing basketball and soccer, but your best sport was definitely soccer. You played that at Bates and NYU, and, we're able to really find a passion for that. Can you talk a little bit about just what drove you to soccer? What made it that interesting? And then with the second part of that is, why did you choose to go to Bates?
Yeah, so soccer for me was a family affair. Um, just this past fall, when I finished my final game of my career at NYU, my mom afterwards handed me like a little picture book, and I didn't actually realize, like, I always knew I've been playing soccer my whole life. Like, I couldn't even remember when I wasn't, but I was able to see some photos of me. Literally, like, you can tell I just learned how to start walking, and it's my mom. Um, my brother, everyone in the family kicking the ball around. There's even photos where my mom's holding me because I probably can't run or like walk, and my mom's chasing my brother kicking soccer balls. So like it's been from the get go. Soccer has been a huge passion of mine. Basketball, as you mentioned too, but soccer definitely was at the core. Um, and then also like for Bates, I think for me, my mom went to Bates, so building from like sort of that family connection of the sport. Um, I'll be honest, like at first, I very much was like, Division 1 soccer player, Division 1 soccer player. Soccer is my passion. I value myself as, making a push to play professionally. And, for the most part, if you want to do that, um, Division 1 is usually seen as the route to go. So I was originally committed to the University of Dayton after I did my postgraduate year at the Berkshire School. Um, and I was committed there for a few months. And, after a little while, I sat down with my coach, my mom, a Batesy. She said, "Look," and to be totally frank with you, like I did not have the best high school GPA, so it was part of me always never really thought like I could go to the Tufts, I could go to like where my dad went and played soccer, I could go to the Bates. So I was always like, okay, I gotta get a scholarship from like a Dayton or like a UMass Amherst type. Um, but I was fortunate to with my mom's connections through Bates, and my sort of having my thumb on the pulse of the school, really build a strong connection with the coach there and the admissions offices, so they're able to get me in. And at first I was really hesitant because I was really, excited about Dayton, the possibility of making the push to play professional. But NESCAC soccer is incredible. It's Division 1 level soccer, and on top of that, you're getting top of the world education, unmatched. While being in a tight knit community, not too far from home, about 2 hours from where I am from Boston. So Dayton would have been a 10-hour drive or a flight. So a little bit of space from Boston, trying a new space, a new community, and branching out, but also like my mom, single mom home. I want to be close enough to my mom. I'm a little mama's boy, and that's okay. I wear that on my shoulder. Um, but so yeah, at the end of the day, I was like, Bates probably the best place for me. We just had a new coach come in, Tyler Shake, has since left. But he was an incredible recruiter, brought in 17 of us, freshman class. One of my best friends from Berkshire, Jacob E. Wool, was going. We had a top recruiting class. And he was like, "Look, we're gonna build something here." And so I was like, "Let's do it." And I've always been drawn to the blank canvas and sort of the raw project. And he's like, nothing's guaranteed, but we anticipate you to come in and have an amazing impact as a freshman. So I said, Dayton, I always will bet on myself, but let's be real, like Division 1, it's a little more cutthroat. Scholarships are on the line. Guys like professional aspirations, they're always looking to overturn. They're never looking to settle. Not that at the NESCAC level they are too, but it's a little bit less cutthroat without the scholarships. And so I felt maybe it's just a better fit for me. And where I was, I just come off like two broken nose injuries, missed like most of my Berkshire season. So stars aligned, and I had an amazing time at Bates. So yeah.
So with that, right, you obviously went through Bates and you kind of talked about the competition within the NESCAC and the academic aspect, but you went to another high academic school afterwards, which is NYU. And as we talked about off air, huge difference in terms of where you're going location wise, right? You're going from Lewiston, Maine, which is a lot like Amherst, Mass, where I went to school, which is
Yep.
nice town, but kind of more remote. As they describe it, some people in the middle of nowhere. But obviously, Lewiston's great and Maine's great. But you go to the biggest city in the United States afterwards to go to NYU, right?
Mhm.
And with that, you play in the UAA, which obviously has, very similar competition angle to a NESCAC. Maybe you could argue which conference is better, but you could say also that the biggest difference is
Mhm.
A, you're in New York, and B, you're traveling on a plane for every game, pretty much.
Yeah.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about like that adjustment for you? Like how hard was that initially? And with that, how are you able to balance everything that you were doing with just kind of that big change being a new city and traveling via plane?
Yeah, so I think the two biggest differences outside of obviously the space itself, Maine versus New York, I think that's pretty obvious. Entirely different living environment. Um, is more just like the rules and regulations. So NESCAC, they've since changed it, but when I was there, we started later preseason. We started 10 days, 11 days later than every other D3 started. As well as we weren't allowed to spring season and we weren't even allowed to connect or communicate with our coaches. So because of that, it was very, very player driven. And with these NESCAC schools, you have these small, intimate schools where it's 1,800, 2,000 people. At Bates, we only had one dining hall. So you're eating every meal with your teammates. You're going sometimes not even more than 4 hours with seeing every single person on your team at Bates. Whereas at NYU, it's the entire opposite. It's a massive campus, 30,000 undergrad, 30,000 graduate, 60,000 total. I've gone in fact, there's a handful of teammates of mine from NYU where after the last game of the year, I have not seen them because, it's not that we're not close, but it's just, it's a busy life in the city. It's a massive campus. You literally just might not see them. So the biggest difference from like a culture standpoint is really, especially in the D3 level, where maybe guys come in with different perspectives. Some guys might come in, really wanting to succeed and like push the athlete side of it. Some just want to be very student driven, sort of, if that makes sense. So you have a wide range of sort of goals and ambitions. And so when you're building a winning culture and those environments, you really need to be on top of each other and sort of building those in-depth relationships and connections and sort of that trust for each other. And at NYU, it's a much different beast because you're not building that familiarity with each other where you're seeing each other 3, 4, 5 times a day, and like you're building that in-depth sort of like ride or die for each other. So I think from the culture standpoint, that's like the hardest point. Like those NESCAC teams, Williams, Amherst, Tufts, Con, all been to national championships in the last. When I was at Bates, all went to national championships. Amherst having been to three in the last like 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
unfortunately, have not lifted it yet. But then Tufts having been to a handful. Middlebury being an incredible team. Bowdoin went to Elite Eight like 2 years ago. Um, it's a really unique league within NESCAC in the sense that where all these teams when they play, it's like they do not give up an inch. And the NYU guys, 2 years before I came, they lost to NESCAC's back-to-back years in the NCAA tournament. It's like they say we like look, we think we're just as good as them from an ability standpoint, but they're just so dialed in at all times. So the team culture, it's entirely different. Not taking anything away from NYU because we're all brothers here. We all get along. It's an amazing time, but it's almost impossible to match if that makes sense. But also just from a logistical standpoint, like you said, we don't have our own home field. We take an hour-long bus ride to Newark to play in a different stadium, different colors, not even our own locker room. It's very unique and kind of weird in that sense. We take vans to our practices on Pier 40, which is like a public space. It's a lot of logistics going into. We're flying for every game. It is very different. And if you're gonna, it's a tough beast. And there's only 3 seniors and 2 grad students. And I think a big reason for that is because it is hard to last 4 years in that environment, where you're looking at 2 to 3 hours of travel before every single game or practice. Like it's a big commitment to be playing college sports in a city like New York.
Right. I mean, it's like for example, the basketball team obviously has their own facility at NYU, right? But like, as you just mentioned, I didn't even know that. I didn't know you guys played at Newark. That's crazy. Yeah, that's that's a hike from New York City, and
That's an
obviously,
hour. Yeah, so to
yeah,
get students out there, if we want students to come watch, they have to take the train up to Penn Station. They have to buy a $12.50 Amtrak ticket. Then they got to go all the way to Newark. And they got to walk from the Newark station. So it's like it's unrealistic. That
yeah,
basketball teams here have incredible fans because it's like New York. There's so many people here who wouldn't want to go watch a college sports game. It's just we're a little
right.
dis. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, New York real estate is extremely expensive. So if someone wants to buy, if an alum wants to come along, build a little stadium downtown. Probably be years before that happens, but you know,
Yeah.
it is
I,
what
at
it is.
least at least I know at Columbia, for example, like they have that football field kind of up like on
Yeah,
like 215th,
yeah,
which they like established. Obviously, they've kind of renovated it, but it's been there for a while. So like that helps out a lot with those problems that you mentioned.
yeah.
But something I wanted to ask too, which is interesting, is obviously you mentioned that you were kind of thrown into a leadership role in a sense because at Bates, I'm not saying you didn't lead or whatever. You probably had to do that as well,
Yeah.
right? Because as you mentioned, you're competing against real like teams that really
Yeah.
don't give an inch, right? But in the UAA, obviously, like you're playing against really high level talent. I mean,
Yeah.
talking to guys, different situation, but like who play basketball at NYU or
Yeah.
other UAA schools, like a Brandeis, for example, competition's fierce, right? So
Oh, it's
an idea like
unbelievable.
you get thrown into a leadership position. Can you talk about how you evolved in that? And because
Yeah.
there's other questions I'm obviously going to ask off of that, but I think this is an important thing to distinguish is like as an athlete,
Yeah.
you have to be a leader if you want to do well.
Yeah.
And how did you lead when you're at Bates, and how did you lead when you're at NYU, and how do you see yourself growing as a leader from that?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll be honest, I'm definitely a big personality. I'm a very motivated, competitive person. So I mean, when I mentioned before the coach at Bates, he really me and him really got along. My first coach, Tyler Shake, that was, and he mentioned me like we want you to have a big role when you come in debates. We want you to really we want your class to turn the tides of what Batesman soccer has been. And so we had a really good freshman year, and I played almost every minute of every game. Had a really big role. We had the best season in Bates history in 20 years. We're a top 25 team a couple of weeks. Um, However, COVID hits, it all gets flipped upside down. Momentum has totally changed. And I think coming off the COVID year, we had these really high expectations. Like, we sort of saw it as, there's Amherst Tufts, and now we're going to be the next thing coming. We truly did 'cause we returned everyone from that amazing year. We really felt like we were gonna make that step, and we just didn't. And so there was a lot of tension within the team, and there was a lot of lack of leadership. And I was a junior at the time, and I feel like that was a big moment for me to not only like step up and maybe like make a little more of my voice and like learn how to rally people together and sort of problem solve, but also like self reflection. Like the reality is we started 6-2 that junior year, my junior season, and we finished on a 7-game skid, 6-9. And I was playing. I started every single game. I was playing almost every minute. If I'm on the field for that many minutes and we're on a 7-game skid, like I'm part of the issue too. So it was a big self reflection moment as well. I think that's where I saw a lot of growth in my leadership at Bates. And going into my senior year, I think just the way I communicated, like I think everyone could always respect my passion and like my commitment to the game and like my hard, like how hard I worked. I think that was when I learned to communicate with people, both like in the good and the bad, right? Communication is so key, especially when you're in this like tight knit family like a Bates, where you're really on top of each other. It's really easy to either like get sick of each other and hate each other, or just like have like the deepest bond you can imagine. Like that's why the NESCAC has done so well. It's why Justin Serpone and Amherst have been incredible for so many years. I think they've gone to like 18 straight years of the Sweet 16, which is insane.
Yeah.
Uh, so going into NYU, like my junior year, I felt like I was a little bit thrown into the leadership role because there was a little a lack of it. Um, and senior year at my Bates, I was able to polish it a bit more. Our coach had just left. We had an interim coach, so I really had to like get my thumb on the pulse of the team. But at NYU, there was only three of seniors who hadn't really played too much, to be honest with you, in their time, or one of them had, but was more of like was to be totally frankly like less of a leadership type player, but just like kind of like was one of our best players, but wasn't much like a vocal person, if that makes sense. So like,
Right.
look, we really need a vocal leadership presence. And I was new to the team, and it's like I'm in New York where I'm not having every meal with them. I don't even know how they react to like success or failure. Like I need to like learn their personality. Like how can I communicate with you versus another player? That's so key, right? Like how can I motivate you versus someone else? So while trying to like adapt to new facilities, new like flights, buses, it was tough. It was difficult. But the route that I found in all those different experiences just like being authentic and like being personable, taking the time to like pull them aside if I don't know you that well. Like, hey, like nice pass, you did this, like compliment sandwich. You did this well, you did that well. I would love to see you do this. Like I think that could elevate us, et cetera, et cetera. Like that type of communication goes such like a long way. And as long as it's consistent and authentic and you're not like being inconsistent and going one way the next day and they can see that and they feel like they can trust you, like they'll open up too and they'll buy in. Like buying in is everything. And that's what Amherst and Justin Serpone have done the last however many years he's been there. Buying in is everything, especially the D3 level. When you don't have a scholarship, you're not trying to play pro. You got exams coming. You're in New York. You got to take the train to practice. Like you just got to be bought in. Um, And so just that's I think the root of it all for my leadership growth is just showing that I'm bought in, not just the team and the goal, but like you as a person, you as like my friend and my teammate.
That's awesome. No, I see why you and I can have conversations because I think that's a big thing that I learned when being at Amherst because actually Serpone ran a lot of these leadership things that we did
Oh yeah.
at Amherst and like rightfully so, right? And I think the best thing that he learned is like, leading is about understanding your teammates, being a part of culture, like growing the team. And it's bigger than just yourself, right? And I think a lot of times people think that leadership is like, I need to tell people what to do, which is,
Mhm.
as you just explained, not always that case, right? So
Yeah.
love that. Speaking of leadership, though, what I want to transition into is I call you Mr. Want to lead every project. And that's a good thing, by the way. But let's start obviously with like the NESCAC Sports Business Group and the capstone stuff you're doing and everything else. And obviously, like you have taken a real initiative of trying to make your sports career about, I think, networking with as many good people around sports as you can
Mhm.
and trying to make a real impact.
Yep.
Right. I think those are two things I've kind of gathered. Can you
Yep.
talk about just, I would say, where the networking aspect came from?
Mhm.
And then I think the biggest thing I want to know from that, because from networking is what impact do you want to leave on sports? Because you and I are around the same age, right?
Yep.
As you get started in this industry, that you think you're able, like what impact are you want to create and how do you think you create it? So I think how do you network properly and what impact do you want to leave? The two questions I want to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with a networking question. I think for me with networking, I mean, the foundation of it for me personally is honestly, I'm just an extreme extrovert. Like I love to meet new people. I love to immerse myself in multicultural environments. I've been very fortunate. I played for, through soccer, I've been fortunate to be in a lot of multicultural environments, meeting people from all over the world, wide backgrounds. I played for Right to Dream, which is an academy based out of Ghana, but they have players who come over and play in the US. So I was able to play in that environment. Lewiston, Maine, where Bates has a huge Somalian community. And so I played for a UPSL team over there called Wada United, where I was one of the only non Somalian players, as well as my Berkshire team, 19-0 national champions in 2018. I have to mention that. I was one of 6 domestic players on the team. So like I've been very fortunate to be in these multicultural environments where I'm able to gain new perspectives and lens in the world. And that for me, like going back to authenticity, was just like so unique. Um, and from there, that's kind of like where I've built this passion to sort of branch out and meet new people and keep expanding my sort of like global network, as you mentioned. Um, and it's a big reason why I came to NYU. And, I was like, okay, I want to network more. Where do I go? New York City, biggest city in the US, a multicultural environment. It's a cultural hub of the US, as well as NYU is arguably one of the most globalized universities in the world. And so through my program, I've been able to go to Abu Dhabi, India. We were just in Brazil. We were to London, and um, sort of like answer the more specific networking. Like when I've been on these trips, right? It's sometimes I was in Saudi Arabia. Like sometimes they can't even speak English. I can't even communicate with them in like a proper way. But as you're building these relationships and networking, I just think it's like going back to authenticity, and a lot of that my director, Daniel Kelly, Dr. Daniel Kelly, he always pushes that. He's like, these relationships are huge. Like they're especially in the sports industry, which is a relationship business, right? It's a team environment, all these companies in the sports industry. When you're building these networks, like you have to be authentic. Like you will get sniffed out if you aren't. Um, like I said, going back to my leadership roles, like being consistent, being authentic, and like being vulnerable, right? And when you're building these relationships in your network, if they don't feel like they're getting the full you and like you're not dropping your barrier, and they feel like they can't like see into you and like what you're about and like what your history and like your emotions and values and passions are, then they're not going to do the same for you. And then once you're able to do that on both sides, like the relationship is there, and then from there it's just about like fostering it and like continuing to invest in that person and like allowing them to also invest in you. Like I bank on myself. I will always push for self growth, but I can only grow so much without the people around me, right? Like if I'm in these different countries, if I'm in Brazil, like I can't just go there and resort to my routine, my habits. I'm in an entirely different country. I don't have a routine or a habit there. Like I need to be open and open my mind to what they're trying to tell me and accept it and then reflect and then move forward with it and broaden my perspective. So from the networking standpoint, that's where I think a lot of my success has been. But that being said, like I don't Like there's a lot more success to be made, in my opinion. I want to continue to meet people and then and broaden that perspective even more. Um, but then to answer sort of with the project side, right? Like I wanted these projects. The big reason why I've started them is because it's to foster that growth. Not particularly my network, but it's like, for example, my NESCAC sports business group. A lot of NESCAC alumni are in the sports business. Not no NESCAC school has a sports management program or whatnot, but there's a lot of like athletes or non-athletes who come out of NESCAC schools and they're very passionate about the industry, right? But there's no specific space for us to all connect. So, and me being an NESCAC alum, I'm passionate about my time in the NESCAC league and as a Bates alum, and I'm passionate about sports. I know there's other alums like that. So why not all come together? Why not try to find a space where we can, even if it's just we talk once a year through a LinkedIn message or we meet one time for a coffee like that. I think that goes such a long way, especially in like when you get older. I realize like, I mean, I'm only 20 through 24 next week, but even just being 1 year out of college, I know it's like people are busy. Like people are like consumed in their families and lives and jobs. But to have like that quick little gateway into sort of maybe like reminiscing about your NESCAC days or finding someone you can share like interests and values with. I mean, it's human nature, in my opinion, to want to connect with different people. So I think it's been huge and it's been a big reason why I've done these projects. And then sort of to answer your question about giving back, I mean, I was a young athlete. I've had amazing experiences through my time as an athlete. Like I said, like being able to play in multicultural environments, meeting new people. And so I want the impact I want to leave on sport is one, to continue to sort of open people's perspectives and like bridge cultures through sport. But it's also like foster young athletes to be able to experience those opportunities as well. So I'm working on a project now with US Soccer Foundation where I'm working as a volunteer, project managing to bring a dual sport futsal and basketball court in my hometown Arlington. It's been approved by the town, the project. Now we're just fundraising. But essentially, U.S. Soccer Foundation Safe Places to Play. They find underutilized courts in urban spaces, folks around urban development, and they'll build these courts. I'm very fortunate to have Miles Robinson, one of the U.S. men's national team players. Hopefully, he'll be playing Copa America. He was named to the preliminary squad. Noel Buck, one of the New England Revolution starting center mids, U.S. or England youth national team player, as well as Pat Connaughton, Milwaukee Bucks guard, all from my town. So we'll be able to create a lot of noise around the project, fundraise a bit, bring the basketball and soccer communities, which have been huge in my town. Bentley Joseph, another big name, and many more big time college or professional basketball and soccer players. So sort of bring the two communities together and create a space where there's gonna be lights there, open until 10 p.m., where children come together and have those same experiences like through sport, if that makes sense. Grow as leaders, grow as people, build lifelong relationships, and sort of like grow as grow as a community too, if that makes sense. So those are some projects I'm working on, and like it's all rooted in I think the values that can be reached through collaboration in sport, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and as I told you before, man, it's always great talking to you. This was cool. I always like talking to people, not just about their athletic journeys, because I mean that's awesome, but like how you've used what you've learned and applied it to wherever you're going, whether it's in as a lawyer, sports person, finance, whatever. Right? I think what's important, obviously, about having an athlete background going to sports is like you see what impact sports can give other people, right? So I think that's awesome. So from my standpoint, love talking to you today, love having you on the episode,
Yeah.
and obviously, thank you so much for making time. And obviously, it's let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Mike.
Absolutely. For everyone listening, another episode of Shreds Takes. Max McKersie was my guest, former Bates soccer player and also NYU soccer player in the sports business program at NYU. So thank you and tune in for more episodes. Have a good one, guys.